Welcome. I'm Sarah Bartlett, the Dean of the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY, and we are so thrilled that you're joining us today, virtually, unfortunately, but for our Awards for Excellence in 2021. This year, we have 4 extremely impressive student and alumni honorees, and the school's been fortunate to help them launch their journalism careers. Before I introduce you to these wonderful journalists, I'd just like to take a moment to thank the partners that have made these awards possible. The Tao Foundation for the Stephen B. Shepard Prize for Investigative Reporting, Karen Penner for the Frederic Wiegold Prize for Business Journalism, Sidney Hillman Foundation for the Sidney Hillman Foundation Award for Social Justice Reporting, and the Newsweek Magazine Alumni Group for the Newsweek Magazine Alumni Prize. Thank you all for your support of these journalists and of the school. And now I have the pleasure of introducing you to our award recipients. The first up is Alison Decanovid. She is the winner of the Sidney Hillman Foundation Award for Social Justice Reporting. She graduated in December from what was then called the Social Journalism Master's Program. Now it's the Engagement Journalism Program. A native of Wisconsin, a terrific student while she was with us, she developed a rent and eviction-focused newsletter for the city as part of her capstone efforts. And for those who aren't familiar with the city, it's a nonprofit news organization launched about 1.5 years ago to help cover New York City, believe it or not. Now Allison is currently helping to lead the city's Civic Newsroom project and newsletter. So congratulations to Allison and welcome.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you so much to the Sidney Hillman Foundation and to everyone at the city and the Engagement Journalism Program at the J School. Really glad to be here, really appreciative.
Thanks, Allison. Next up, and by the way, we're going to introduce each one of these and then we're going to have a chance to hear from them at much greater length. So just wanted to make sure that everyone gets introduced to them first. The next prize is the Frederic Wiegold Prize for Business Journalism. And we give it each year to a recent graduate of the business concentration who shows the greatest potential for a career in business reporting. This year, that prize goes to Dalvin Brown in our class of 2020. Dalvin is a native of Mississippi. He earned his undergraduate degree in business journalism from CUNY's Baruch College. After working at USA Today throughout his time at the school, he is now the innovation reporter at the Washington Post. Congratulations, Dalvin, and so happy you're able to be with us today. Please join us and say a few words.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that. And, when I signed up for the program, I knew I wanted to concentrate on business and economics. So to be recognized by that institution means a lot, especially, seeing as though it was so instrumental in getting me to where I am. So thank you. And also to anyone from the Frederic Wiegold program that helped me to do this and receive this award. It really means a lot.
Thanks, Dalvin. Next up is Valen Irissibar. The Newsweek Magazine Alumni Prize goes to her and honors a student who values whose best value reflects those of the school. And that Valen is someone who worked with her quite a bit. There was just no contest there. From the day they arrived in New York from Argentina, they played an active role in school leadership, serving as a member of the Graduate Student Council and acting as a strong advocate for transgender and international students. Valen has stayed for a 4th semester to finish their capstone, which is about how New York City's budget addresses the city's trans, gender nonconforming, and non-binary community. Welcome to Valen and congratulations.
Thank you people in the chat. Yeah, I'm just incredibly honored, and as you mentioned, I participated as much as I could, perhaps to a fault, the amount of times that we have spoken, and I just thoroughly enjoyed being at the J School, and the fact that I've been awarded a prize that's, reflects the values of the school is just an incredible honor. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Valen. The final, but last but not least, award is the Stephen B. Shepard Prize for Investigative Reporting. And for those who are on this call and don't know the name Stephen B. Shepard, he is the founding dean of the Graduate School of Journalism, and also was the editor-in-chief of Business Week for many years. And I was fortunate to work with him in both of those instances. So a longtime mentor that the Tao Foundation honored with this prize. It goes to Roxana Asgharian from the class of 2011 for her compelling in-depth stories about the failures of the child welfare system in Texas, where she is based. A freelancer, Roxana is currently writing a book on the subject for Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. Roxana, welcome and congratulations.
Thanks, Sarah. I want to thank Stephen Shepard and the Tao Foundation, and it's a really big honor for me. I know the caliber of our alumni is so top-notch, so it really means a lot. Thank you.
And I can confirm that as one of the members of the committee that had to read through some fabulous applications for that prize, it was really, you had tough competition, and it is a great honor for you. So let me now go into the fun part of this conversation, which is a little bit more informal. And what I'd like to do is ask each of you, I have some questions that I'd like each of you to address, and maybe we'll stay in that same order since we kind of are familiar with it in this Zoom environment. So Allison, let's start with you. And if you could just talk for a few minutes about your background, where you came from, how you fell in love with journalism, how you ended up at the J School, just so that we get a sense of sort of your journey here.
Sure, thanks, Sarah. My background, like you had mentioned, I think in the intro, I grew up in Wisconsin, just south of Milwaukee, and was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, working as a local news reporter right before I moved here. But it was really some of my background in working with youth organizing and youth development spaces, and also in classrooms, both in Milwaukee and in Oakland, California, that made me really curious about how we could do journalism a little bit differently. And I was really excited about the ways that journalism could better serve local communities. And when I learned more about the engagement program at the Newmark J School, I was really excited. It merged what I loved about news and journalism and also community work. And so I was really drawn to that, really excited about the work happening here. And that's how I ended up here at the J School and also at the city. I'm really excited about exploring new ways to do local news to serve new communities.
Actually, can you, while you mentioned that, tell us how you got to the city and what the connection there is?
Sure. I started working at the city while I was in school. The engagement director at the city, Terry Paris Jr., is one of the faculty members and instructors in the engagement journalism program. And when we were in class, he was talking about a project that they were starting called the Open Newsroom, which is a partnership between the Brooklyn Public Library and the city. And it's a way, the goal of the project was to make local news a bit more collaborative. And so they were hosting community meetings in libraries, working in different neighborhoods to work together to create local news that way. And I was really excited about that project, was really curious, wanted to get involved. And so started working with the city then, and then interned in the spring when the pandemic hit, and was working on the engagement team answering reader questions about the coronavirus and answering everything about what to do if you lost your job and can't get through the unemployment system, can't pay rent. And that's kind of what sparked some of the work that you had mentioned with the rent newsletter and some of my capstone work.
Yeah, I think you've become one of the leading experts at this point in both unemployment and eviction, which sadly in New York City has been an important topic. Dalvin, let me turn to you now. You've had a fascinating journey to get to the Newmark J School. Can start at the beginning and lead us through it.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Mississippi, as you had mentioned earlier, and I moved to New York City, unsure of whether I wanted to go into fashion design or whether I wanted to go into journalism. And I did a few design internships that were really close to the J School. And as I was falling out of love with fashion, I felt like I would look up every day and see the CUNY J School. And I'm like, okay, when I finish my degree, I want to go there. And I decided to focus on business journalism at Baruch. And upon finishing that degree, I had a hard time landing an internship, finding a job, and I saw a program at CUNY, a summer program for journalists of color that were looking to break into the news biz. And so I applied and got a scholarship for the school out of that, and decided to double down on some of the business journalism things that I learned in undergrad. And I felt like the program really helped me not only feel more confident in my abilities as a reporter, but also gave me a network of journalists around me that I could tap if I needed a job or any advice when it came to negotiating and things like that. And it ultimately led to my current position at the Washington Post covering innovation. So yeah, that's how I got here.
Dalvin is a little bit modest, so I'm just going to point out that not everyone who goes through that summer program, which was funded for 4 years, mostly by the Knight Foundation, not everyone got a full ride, free tuition at the school, only those of the top 5 of that group. And so Dalvin was one of those top 5, and he's been we've been very proud of his work and his affiliation with us. So I just wanted to brag a little bit more about you, Dalvin. So next up, Valen, tell us about how you ended up all the way from Argentina at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism.
So I was already doing journalism. I was already a journalist before coming to the J School, but I had basically given up on it. I was like, I don't like it anymore. It sucks. It's awful. I worked at it's all clickbait. Like, what's the point? And then I went to this thing called a media party here in Buenos Aires, which is one of the fabulous things that my city has, which is it's just this huge event where anyone who is a journalist or wants to do journalism can show up, and a lot of different media companies and schools show up. And Jeff Jarvis was the keynote speaker, and he was just talking about like how CUNY works and the ethos and the way that the J School approaches reporting and communities. And I was like, oh, it exists. Like the journalism that I thought was how you should do it, it exists somewhere, and like there are people teaching it. And I had also gotten really into podcasting, and I wanted to learn audio. So as soon as I saw the incredible audio department that the J School has, I was like, sold. And I just ended up applying and was lucky enough to get in. And I guess here we are.
And the rest is history, yeah. And you had to encounter some of the bumpiness, not just of the pandemic, but also the trials of being an international student during a time when visas became, I think, very threatened. So maybe you could just say a little word about how you navigated that last year.
Wow, yeah, as best as I could, really. And to be clear, I've moved back to Buenos Aires, but because I chose to, not because something happened. So just in case anyone on the call was particularly worried. It was really difficult. Obviously, the previous administration was not particularly friendly to international anything. And there were a few instances where our stay in the US was being threatened. There was one point where essentially we were told we would have to leave the country within a week as a community, and it was hard. I'm not gonna lie. I don't really know how I navigated that. It more just the wider CUNY community. I did really want to commend the different student councils across, because CUNY is gigantic, really banded together. There was an amicus brief from several universities, so some feeling of community. And I don't know, maybe general optimism or denial, I'm not really sure. No one's ever asked me that, so thank you.
And Roxana, it is such a joy to have you on this call. We were once in a classroom together a million years ago, and your career spans a longer period of time than the others on this call, because this is really much more for any alum to apply for this prize and submit work. So tell us a little bit about how you came to the J School, and then what you've been up to since then.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a little bit older, so that's probably why I have more under my belt. So I'm from Las Vegas originally. I've always wanted to be a writer. I went to University of Texas for my undergrad in journalism. I graduated in 2009, which, as we all know, was not a great time for journalism. Very confusing time for journalism. So I felt like I had kind of the basics under my belt, but I was at a loss as to like how to get a job in the field. And I wanted to learn about all the changes instead of just, I wanted more skills to make me more marketable. So that's how I ended up at CUNY. I'm a proud public school student from kindergarten through my master's. So CUNY was important for me in that way. I had a great time. I learned a ton. After I graduated, I have been doing a mix of freelance and staff roles. So I was a stringer for the New York Daily News. Then we moved down to Houston, and I did some business reporting. And then I worked at a city magazine. And while I was at that city magazine, I did my first story about the foster care system in Texas. And that's sort of became my focus since then. It never really left me. It's a really important subject, and it doesn't feel like it's super widely covered. So after I left my role at the city magazine, that has been my focus, along with criminal justice, where there's a lot of overlap. So that's what I've been doing for the last few years.
I see in the chat that another alum who you happen to marry and have a child with is putting some of the links into your stories, ever the supportive, which is great. So I think it'd be really nice for people on the call to get a sense of what the academic programs were and what you sort of learned in your time, during your time at the school, to see how that connects with the journalistic work that you're doing now. So Allison, if you could just tell us a little bit about what you feel like you really gleaned about journalism from the engagement program, how that has changed your work and your career path, sort of make the connection between the J School and your own professional path.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, something that was really exciting to me about the J School, and a huge reason why I was drawn to it, like I said, I was drawn specifically to the engagement journalism program, and like Valen said that they had an encounter with Jeff Jarvis. I had similarly come across a post from Carrie Brown a couple of years ago, who was the director of the engagement program, and cold called her from Twitter and was like, "What you writing about? Seems really cool. I'm into it. I want to learn more." And she had kind of planted the seed of the program. Timing didn't line up until it did. But so I was really drawn to the people behind the program, to the new work that they were trying. I wanted to be surrounded by people who were asking similar questions to me, but also stretching the questions that I was asking. We're thinking about journalism in new, innovative ways. And I definitely found that. I definitely met so many people who are doing really inspiring work, and really asking critical questions that I think will transform the industry in the way that it needs to in the future. As far as the engagement program, I think one curriculum, academic thing that really was drilled down is thinking about the impact of our work and how we think critically about one, like who our work is for and how we can show that impact and how we can measure it. A big thing in engagement journalism is looking at who we're reaching, how we're reaching them, and what impact that's having. And so I think that thinking through the intention behind any story or any project, and what we hope the impact to be of that, and how we can track that and build on it, is something that I learned in an engagement program.
Thanks. Dalvin, I know you studied under Greg David, who's infamous perhaps. Tell us a little bit about, when you look back at the courses that you took in the business concentration in particular, or other courses at the school, like what has had an impact on you, and how has that translated for you in your career?
Yeah, for sure. I think Greg David's courses specifically were probably the most useful with what I do today, and then what I also started doing in my previous role at USA Today, which was on the business and tech team. And I think his classes just really taught me how to follow the money, and to know that like just slapping a number into a story isn't always enough. But adding context to that number. And I think that class gave me the resources to add context to numbers. And it also built up the confidence. When I came through the door, I had never spoken with a single investor. And for Greg's stories, we had to speak with several. I'm sure I've spoken to dozens, maybe close to 100 in such a short time at the grad school. So yeah, I use those every day with virtually every story that I tell, just trying to figure out, how can I ground this concept in a hard number, and who are the people who can help add context to that. So that was really valuable. And then beyond just the business and concentration, certainly craft also helped bolster that confidence, right? Because I had never had to go speak to people on the ground, certainly not in the way that I did on the master's degree level. And yeah, I had to do that every week in craft. So yeah, I think that those are tools that I still use today, and that help me feel confident when I am cold calling an expert for a story.
So for those who aren't familiar with the word craft, and you'll see some grimaces on people's faces when we use that word, it's our sort of core reporting and writing course that is both in the first semester and in the second semester. And it's really where we ground them in hardcore reporting. So it's an intense 6 credit, all day, 1 day a week in the first semester. So Dalvin and everyone here survived it. Valen, when you look back, I mean, you're still enrolled because you're just finishing up your 4th semester and your capstone. But when you think about the program, and what are some of the highlights for you, and what are going to be key takeaways that will help you feel your way in your future career?
So, I mean, a couple of things. First of all, I mentioned audio. I'm currently not enrolled in classes, so I can't speak to what this current spring semester is like. I finished my classes in December. So currently I'm just working on my investigation with Daryl, who is on the call right now and is head of urban. I can just start with Daryl. Like one of the things, one of the highlights for me was the social justice class that we had, like social issues, drawing a line between the civil rights movement and current coverage, which to me was incredibly helpful. I have always been a huge history nerd, and it's nice to have my gratuitous reading of history actually have some kind of usefulness and like some practicality. So now I can say like, oh no, I'm reading, and it really, I can find ways to extract things from history. Extract isn't a great word, but how to inform my coverage and really educate myself on just the evolution of journalism and the way that we view and perceive social issues. That was one of my highlights. And one thing that I have actually said a lot, and my partner laughs because he hears me say it because he knows that Daryl said it, but the specificity is tyranny. In the 3 apartments I've lived in since he said this, I've had a Post-it that says specificity against tyranny, not specificity is tyranny, specificity against tyranny. So this notion of getting as specific as possible, if you're trying to deal with some injustice or just look into an issue, the more specific that you get, the better it is when it comes to overarching structures. And I could go on forever. But the other thing I also wanted to get into, aside from the urban concentration, which I absolutely loved, is audio. So I had never worked in audio before. I had just done written journalism, just written journalism. I love it. It's my first love. There's nothing wrong with just doing written journalism. But I was like, okay, I want to learn how to use Pro Tools. But I did the audio not the concentration, but I concentrated in audio as my format, and audio files is a class where it's the live radio magazine. And I went from never having worked in any capacity in audio to having to churn out as a reporter every 2 weeks a live segment or pre-record or create a segment that would go live. And we learned how to do that virtually. So despite the pandemic, it was incredibly useful. And I have to shout out Callie Anderson and Maggie Freeling, who I don't think are on the call today, but they were just fantastic. You know, we couldn't go into the studio. So recreating that studio experience and managing to pull it all off on Zoom to later be broadcast on different radios and actually win prizes across the board was just incredibly gratifying and a massive learning experience. And now I'm infinitely more confident in my audio capabilities. So those are the two main things.
Wonderful. Great selling points. Roxana, can you remember all that way back, and any highlights for you?
I can. I can. So I also was in the urban concentration, and at that point, Sarah, you were in charge. And so that was really great. You reached out to me.
To say that.
Well, no, you reached out to me when I actually was in the application process, and you said, I think you would be a good fit for the urban program. And I, you know, I have a great interest in systems and how systems affect human experience. So this was a really great way for me to start understanding how governments work. And, you know, I mean, that's stuff that you can always use as a reporter. So then there are just a few. So Tom Robbins, he did an investigative class for me. So since I'm winning this award for this reason, I definitely should shout him out because he's great, amazing. He continues to mentor me and helps if I have like a weird random question about how I might get a certain document or something. So that was really wonderful. Fred Kaufman, he taught narrative. And so that's a big piece of what I'm doing. And, you know, I'm working on a book now. So I thank my lucky stars that I got in some time with him, who, you know, he's an author as well. And it's almost like a whole different challenge. So that's really important. And then Daryl, he was the one who helped me get a start in criminal justice reporting. So that's informed a ton of my work from basically right when I graduated CUNY up until now.
That's great. I love all the citations of the professors, because one thing I think our school does incredibly well is attract amazing teachers who really are so invested in their students, and they pour their heart and soul into it. So it's nice to get that kind of feedback. This is the first time we've ever given awards to people who had to learn in the middle of a pandemic and had to experience online instruction. We were always a high-touch, in-person academic community. And so I know Roxana hasn't been directly impacted with coursework. I'm sure, I do want to hear how it's impacted your book research. But again, if we could just start at the top with Allison and just, I think, give us a feel for what impact has the pandemic had on both your studies and now your current work. How are you dealing with that, and what can you share about the experiences that you had at the school that were really impacted that way?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, obviously the pandemic upended all of our grad school experiences and our reporting experiences. And yeah, for me, it really 180'd a lot of the work that I was doing and how I was thinking about it. At the time, I had been working on kind of a longer term project on the history of homeownership in a neighborhood in Brooklyn. And we had, for my capstone, I was thinking about doing almost like theater as journalism, partnered in this neighborhood in this like long-term project. And then the pandemic hit, and not only were we online for school and pivoting to how to learn online, but the nature of the work that we were doing, everything became so much more urgent. And I had spent a semester and a half learning a lot about information needs and how we can better listen to communities' information needs and how news can meet those information needs. And then all of a sudden, the needs were so urgent and so extreme and so constant. Like I said, for the city, we had a call out that we just put out a simple call out, like, what questions do you have about the coronavirus? And we just were fielding like thousands and thousands of questions about that. And so it was really wild to be, and also kind of disorienting. I had moved back to Wisconsin for a few months to stay with family, and so was doing grad school from my parents' home, but fielding questions from New Yorkers. So was kind of experiencing the pandemic from all these different angles, and being privy to, I got a really interesting insight into the way that the pandemic was impacting so many lives in such dire ways, through the kinds of questions that people are asking. And it's always fascinating and honestly really upsetting to me when people come to a journalist with some of these questions that we as journalists maybe don't have answers to, but is more just indicative of the extent of the need. And so that really pivoted a lot of my work into how can we better meet these urgent information needs with the work that we're doing? How can we kind of tailor the work that we're doing, the stories we're writing, the format, the product that we're creating to be really responsive to these needs as they're coming up? And so rather than kind of like this broad, in-depth, like historical project, I ended up doing my capstone on like this super responsive newsletter about the latest changes to eviction laws and things like that, because the information was just changing so rapidly, the needs were changing so rapidly, and so it kind of changed my whole mindset toward the work, just because the time demanded that.
And how many subscribers have there been with the eviction newsletter? Do you have any idea?
I don't have that off the top of my head. It's a few, it's like several thousand at this point, but most of those, we found that most people find those stories as well through search. People are searching like, what's up with the moratorium, or where is rent relief, and those kinds of questions, and that's how they're getting to that information often is explicitly searching for it.
So you developed that entire line of reporting from Wisconsin to help New Yorkers facing eviction, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had a team too, and we were in school, but we had a team. Yeah, we had a whole system of fielding this. We just had this massive spreadsheet that was, we laughed about it because we had to, but yeah, we just had this massive spreadsheet of questions. And so we kind of went through the process of what do we do about this? We started trying to answer them individually, and that was just a nightmare because we were basically like reporting out individual answers and there just wasn't time. So then we started doing like FAQs, and then we started doing like online events where we were bringing in experts and answering questions. And then we pivoted to more of a newsletter format. So it's just like regular updates, but all informed by reader questions and things that people were writing into us, asking about, or had asked about at events that we had held and things like that.
Well, you've played a really important role in helping the city as it evolves. Dalvin, how did the pandemic impact your work and some of your life choices?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the biggest thing is, for a while, every story that I wrote after the pandemic started related to the pandemic in one way or another. Probably for 6 months, every story tied back to the pandemic in one way or another. And it was interesting because I think when things first shut down, I was working full time at USA Today at the time. And so I thought, well, now I have more time to dedicate to schoolwork, seeing as though I don't have to commute at all. And boy, did I need that extra time, because there was so much happening, and I chose to focus on the pandemic's impact on Black-owned businesses for my capstone. And there were so many businesses that had, a unique set of issues that I wanted to first understand, obviously, before I started to report about. And so I, as things started to open back up, I was lucky enough to be able to do some on-the-ground reporting in Harlem and go to some of those businesses and see how things are faring and how they weren't. And so really my entire capstone was only was possible because of the pandemic, for better or for worse, I suppose. So that was both a challenging thing, but also an opportunity, I think, for me to adapt again. But interestingly, some of my classes, my business reporting classes, actually were pretty successful remotely, which was something that I didn't know was going to happen. A lot of what we did was, call analysts, call experts, call investors, and you can do a lot of that from your home. And I do some of that from my home today, even post-graduation. So I'm glad that I did get that type of experience. There were classes though that were impacted, in my opinion, beyond repair to some degree. So video, one of my video classes, for instance, it was relatively new to me, video, and understanding how to work the cameras was new to me. And so doing that remotely at home, and not being able to troubleshoot. But yeah, that class in particular, it was really difficult when I wasn't able to get this sort of hands-on instruction with some of the video equipment. However, again, you pivot, and I've found ways to tell video stories remotely and get people to shoot things inside their homes and send to me. And so I think, if nothing else, it was an opportunity to be crafty and to use some of those skills that you learn early on in the J school to pivot. And if a story isn't working out, you adapt. And yeah, I did a lot of that.
Yeah, I think the entire school had to learn how to pivot, and I'm glad to hear that for the most part, the classes were able to be maintained and the skills developed. Valen, what was your experience like during the pandemic? And, we did have this requirement that you couldn't report for the longest period of time outside of your home unless you got a waiver. So for those who were on the call and didn't appreciate just how challenging this was for our students and for our faculty.
Yeah, it's funny because in a way so before starting the program, most of my journalism was actually reported from home or not as local shoes on the ground. I very much learned that at CUNY. So it was a really interesting pivot for me because it wasn't completely alien to me having to report from home because I'd already done that before, but I suddenly had a lot more skills and I understood a bit more how to report on the ground locally. So I definitely felt that really keenly because obviously it's not the same. For example, when we did craft, we all have assigned neighborhoods, right? And mine was Jackson Heights. And obviously Jackson Heights ended up being the center of the epidemic. And it was, bizarre to see just the names that I recognized and streets and Elmhurst Hospital, places that I had been to 3 weeks earlier, and just seeing how much it had changed. And I felt pretty powerless when it came to reporting because I couldn't be there. So I did feel that. But on the other hand, it was kind of a return to the way I thought about my stories beforehand. It was less, we talked about this quite a bit in audio about, not limiting yourself to just what you have in your backyard. So as an example, anyone who knows me knows that as well as covering politics, I love quirky news. That's my thing. I don't know why, but I think it's just a product of being in a country where almost all the news is quirky, for better or for worse. And I went from covering the first rally held by Elizabeth Crowley in Audiocraft. Because it was just starting, the Queensborough presidential election was just getting started. And then that was one of my so-called day books. And then my third or fourth day book was about a Japanese aquarium that was taking calls from people all over the world so that the eels wouldn't forget what humans look like, because they were worried that like they would get really scared. And it's one of those things where obviously it's not ideal to, the circumstances under which I was reporting on this aquarium in Japan. But I ended up talking, I was recording a live stream of a bunch of eels, which kind of makes you question what you're doing with your life. But also I got in touch with a Georgian marine biologist via Twitter, because suddenly your world is social media and like the way that you get in touch with people in a way that I never had. And so he was like, I want to talk to these eels and I can't get through. And I was like, hey, do you want to do an interview? And so I ended up learning a lot about eels, and it was like a lot of fun. And it was one of the instances of, okay, this isn't great. I would love to be at the J School, but also I'm learning how to cut audio and record audio in a way that it's presentable and potentially publishable. The same thing for audio files. I think it made me quite a lot more independent. Shout out to Chad Bernhard, who's obviously our incredible in-house audio engineer, but I think I know how to do quite a bit more by myself, and I think that's always the way that CUNY worked, and that's why audio files is so important. But I just felt like I had to go that extra mile a little bit because I couldn't just go in and be like, Chad, please fix this for me, which obviously we did via email, but you couldn't just like run into the studio and get like this beautiful, pristine recording. You have to learn how to do that pristine recording by yourself. So it's kind of a mix, I think. It's obviously not great, but I think it expanded the horizons a little bit as to what you can cover. Allison being in Wisconsin, I'm now in Buenos Aires covering the New York City budget, and also just learning a little more how to do things yourself, I think, are my takeaways.
I love that even though it was an incredibly challenging and painful time for so many of us, that you all are giving great examples of how you were able to adjust and adapt and turn this to your benefit. Roxana, I can't even imagine what it's like to be reporting a book in the middle of this. Tell us how that's impacted you.
Yeah. Well, first I just want to say it sounds like you guys really handled it well, and that's so awesome because it's a huge challenge. I mean, grad school is a huge challenge anyway, but under these circumstances, sounds like you guys really adapted really well. So I got a book deal 2 weeks before the lockdown hit. And so in one way, I had done quite a lot of reporting before that. I've been working on it since 2018. So just like very basic strokes. It's about the child welfare system told through a story of a really awful tragedy involving adoptive mothers and their 6 adoptive kids who crashed in California off a cliff, and basically how the system, how the failures of the system contributed to that. So my living sources some of them are quite medically fragile, and so there was a challenge there. And luckily I've spent a good amount of time with these folks, and we had a lot of phone calls, and I had to go into court. So there's a different protocol these days. I was the only person in the courtroom. Everyone else is on Zoom, but I needed to be there in person. So I've had to, before every hearing, I have to reach out to the court folks and be like, just, let me know if there's any changes. What do I need to do? So it's definitely adapting. I've had to do a couple reporting trips, and those are just impossible to get around. So, it's been a challenge. I have a 4-year-old, and so he's been home with us for most of the time. And so that's another challenge. We've been doing some very interesting scheduling gymnastics, me and my husband, through this past year.
Are you able to get vaccinated in the Houston area? Is it pretty accessible?
Yes, we're fully vaccinated. So our son Rocco, he just started back at school yesterday.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm furiously writing. I mean, my book is due in the fall, so I got a little time, but it's go time now.
So, what you all do every day is stories. And when you think back on the favorite story of yours that you developed while you were at the J School, can you just, share a little bit about that? That's where journalism, rubber meets the road. What's your favorite story?
I wish that I had a moment to think before I had to go. The first story that popped in my head, just because it's a source that I still keep in touch with, which is fun, and was also ended up being a piece of my capstone. But I did because I think I really miss on the ground reporting. I'm starting to get to do it a little bit more, but I miss really being in community, getting to explore neighborhoods, getting to learn so much from meeting people. And yeah, getting to be welcomed into someone's home for an interview always felt like the biggest privilege. So one story that I did during school was about a group of residents in a neighborhood in Brooklyn pushing to make their neighborhood a cease and desist zone, which that means it's a kind of a wonky law, but preventing real estate speculators from being able to come and try to purchase their home and flip it to redevelopment. And I really enjoyed that story. One, I met some really amazing people. I learned a ton about, it was kind of my intro, dipping my toes into the housing market of New York. But also I loved it because it was not just about this like big problem that we hear about, gentrification, like this big kind of abstract concept, but looking at I think Valen, you were talking about specificity and is the opposite of tyranny or something, but like looking at in a specific neighborhood, like in this specific economic circumstances, there's this phenomena happening and these are what neighbors are doing about it to prevent it. So it also felt like specific about policy and also highlighting the people who are most impacted by that issue who are organizing and taking action about it. So that kind of hit all those sweet spots that I like to hit on when I'm reporting.
Dalvin, favorite story?
Yeah, I had a little bit more time to think about it, and I think it was my capstone. Just for several different reasons. I think being able to speak with so many business owners over the course of 6 months for a story, I think really gave it an arc that I've never been able to. I've never spent 6 months reporting on any other story. So I just think that, that was really enriching. I think part of what made it so special to me was I got to see up close how different these businesses are that contribute to what is New York City, and just how different the cuisine is from a variety of Black-owned businesses around the city. I think I just learned a lot when reporting it, and there was a lot of passion that went into it, and a lot of them spoke with a lot of passion. And yeah, I mean, I haven't read it since I filed it 6 months ago, but I kind of want to go back and be like, and look at it again. But yeah, I just think that was a tremendously meaningful story that I had reported over a long time, and so I would definitely say that was my favorite.
Terrific. Valen?
I'm kind of stuck between two. I think if I had to go with one that is up somewhere, it's the audio files. It's a piece I did for audio files for Trans Day of Remembrance, which is a day where we honor people who were taken away from us because of gender-based violence, and transgender people, gender non-conforming and non-binary people are at very much the front end of that. And as a trans person and as a journalist, there's a lot in there's really a media discourse around trans people, and there tends to be certain narratives that are presented in very much the same way, especially because I think that it's a lot of reporting from people who don't share the experience, who don't quite believe in the experience, and Trans Day of Remembrance tends to be covered in very much the same way, which is how awful it is, which is true, right? But it focuses a lot on the tragedy of the violence that the transgender community is subject to. And as a trans journalist, I was thinking, well, what can I do? In what way can I cover this in a way that feels meaningful to me and to really cover what this day means? And one thing that I have come across a lot is that trans joy is an act of resistance, and trans resilience is inherently a thing of strength. So and another thing that I have become really interested in is trans elders, and like the generational advice and wisdom that we can gain, from elders, and just seeing how different generations of trans people coexist, view the world, and just being. And so for that piece, I got together an FTM trans teenager from upstate New York, he's just lovely, like a filmmaker. He's very young, and a trans elder, a trans woman of color. And I just got them talking to each other. What does Trans Day of Remembrance mean to you? Like, what is and just talking more about like trans futures and trans joy, not to negate the context in which we live, but to not have trans coverage always be co-opted by the negative and the tragic, because in the end, we're full people, right? There's more to us, and so that's one I'm particularly proud of. And the other one was one I just did for craft, about a library closing, because libraries are close to my heart, and it was just, I loved it. But yeah, I think those two, because the library one was very local and very, specific to, it was a Long Island City branch that was closing, and that to me really encapsulated my CUNY experience. Like, I was there with the microphone. But then the other one felt more, there was 3 trans people across the US just talking. And oh, Dalvin, I'll see if I can find, it should be on the audio files site. I will look. That we have John Mancini here, who is the head of the New York City News Service. So he probably knows better than me where you can listen to that piece.
Thanks, that was really amazing. I mean, I think what you're seeing with all of these students is the way that they're just finding stories that aren't getting told otherwise, and bringing their life experience to help educate and inform the world. So Roxana, do you either have a story that is resonant to you from your time at the school, or from the work that you've been doing more recently that you want to share?
Sure. I would love to answer this question because no one has ever asked me this question. My capstone was about women truck drivers and the sexual harassment and assault that they often experience as part of their training. So young drivers have to be with older drivers for a certain number of hours in order to get their licenses and be on the road alone. So this was pre-Me Too, and it just kind of, I stumbled on it kind of, but it was a really important story for me in multiple ways. The first being, I just loved the people that I got to meet. I got to hang out with a lot of truck driving women, and that was super cool. And then also it was the first long form that I pitched and as a freelancer, and that got accepted. And so it took me years. So I turned in my capstone, and then I got a staff job, and I never forgot it. And I really wanted to publish it because it wasn't out there. And I just felt so, but it took me so long, and it was so hard because I just had never done it before. But I think about that experience. So I think it came out in 2014 in Bitch magazine. And I got paid nothing for it, but it was, essentially I think about it all the time right now. So I'm doing my first book, and it's really hard. And I keep thinking, okay, you remember how you felt when you did your first long form story, and it was so hard, and you couldn't understand how to do it, and it just felt like it wasn't going to click. And now I do them. Now I do those stories. Like, I know how to do them. I do them regularly. So I think about it all the time when I'm doing something new that's hard. That it always feels really hard when you do it for the first time.
Wow, such wonderful stories and insights and conversation. I want to thank all of you. And as one of the people in the chat pointed out, thank you for your tolerance of that terrible Zoom bombing. I'm really sorry that that occurred. And thank you for being so tolerant of this bad behavior of others. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. I hope that you feel as proud of all of these 4 journalists as I do, and I'm glad you were able to join us in highlighting their accomplishments. And lastly, I just want to thank again our funders who made these awards possible for us. It's a treat to be able to give these out every year, and I'm sad that we're not doing it in person, but I feel like all of us got a real taste of what your lives are like and the accomplishments that you've already had. And I know 10 years from now, I'm going to be reading about all of you. So thanks to everyone for joining today, and enjoy the rest of your day.